Episode 3 takes place about 3 weeks after Uncle George passed away. Everybody's gotten back to Chicago, and Letty's even brought a house. She claims that she got the money from winning the lottery, and she surprises Ruby with it, telling her that she's planning on fixing it up and creating a boarding house for other black people in the neighborhood that need help. But Ruby lets her know that might not be the best idea, because a black couple moved into an all-white building not too long ago, and it created a lot of problems. But Letty says there's strength in numbers, so that's where they're going to live. Now, Tick, meanwhile, has been staying with Dee and Hippolyta, and he's been helping out around the house, but he's worn out his welcome, and he knows it. He's just been driving Hippolyta insane as she deals with the death of her husband. So he heads on over to his dad's place, and he finds his dad asleep in the middle of a dream, and he wakes him up. And his dad was mumbling, "I got you, kid." And immediately, Tick knows what he was dreaming about, because when they were kids, George and Montrose were in a riot together, and they were about to get killed when some random stranger came out, swinging a baseball bat like Jackie Robinson, and took out the guys who were ready to go in on Montrose and George. And the only thing the guy said was, "I got you, kid," and then he disappeared as fast as he showed up. They never found out who he was. And that might explain the dream that Tick was having when he was on the bus heading to Chicago. He tells his dad that he's been staying over there, and both Hippolyta and Dee could probably use him around, and that it's really weird being there and knowing what happened to Uncle George. But Montrose cuts him off saying, well, they know what happened. That hot-headed sheriff shot him. She saw the body. And Tick says, I know that's what we agreed on, but it just doesn't feel right. And Montrose says, what do you want us to do? Tell her that there's wizards? It's just best if we just let her believe that he was shot. The two get into a fight, and Tick knows that he just can't stay there. So he heads on over to Letty's boarding house, where she's fixed it up and it's move-in day. And she's walking around, helping people move in, taking pictures of the event. But then, to her surprise, in walks Tick. And this is the first time the two are seeing each other since George's funeral 3 weeks ago. And he really just showed up to check in on her before he hits the road, because he's planning on going back down to Florida. She tells him how she has a room available. If he wants it, he can stay a little bit. But their conversation is interrupted when they hear a car horn outside. And when everybody in the boarding house goes outside, they see their white neighbors, and they are not pleased that they're there. And they're the ones who are blaring on the horn using a brick to keep the horn going all night. And that's when Tick decides, you know what? Yeah, I will stick around. So a couple days later, the car horn is still going strong, and the community is even banded together to make signs that say, we are a white community. Undesirables must go. But Letty and her group haven't moved out. But as Letty is sleeping, you just see two arms grab the sheet of her bed as a really mangled face pops up from the floor. And Letty can't see any of this because she's sleeping, but the arms grab the sheet, and that's when she wakes up in a sweat because something is wrong with her radiator, and it has put the heat up at full blast in the house. And since most people have their windows closed because of that car horn, they wake up drenched. So Letty heads down to the basement, fixes the radiator, or it might be a furnace. I don't know, I'm not very handy. Probably why I make YouTube videos. But then she hears a noise, and she starts searching around the basement, and she can hear voices whispering, and the floorboards are moving. But then all of a sudden, the floorboards shoot up, and she can hear those voices even louder, and it freaks her out. So she goes to get Tick to investigate, and they find a room underneath the basement floorboards. But when they go in, nothing's there. And Tick thinks maybe it's the stress of what they went through in Artem. That night, though, they have a massive housewarming party with everybody there, including Tick. And Hippolyta showed up with a bunch of food. She's brought over the food that she just can't eat since people are dropping off food since George died. And she makes a dig at Tick, to which Letty says he said he was helping out. And Hippolyta says he was. And he was doing all these little things, but he wasn't doing it like George did. And she knows that she's being ridiculous, but it annoyed her. Later on in the party, she goes looking for Dee, and Dee is downstairs playing with a Ouija board with a couple of their kids. And like typical kids, they ask if anybody's there. And then all of a sudden, the Ouija starts moving to spell out George. And it really upsets Dee, who says it's not funny, but all of the kids say, it wasn't me, we didn't move it. And as Hippolyta is looking for Dee, one of the rooms in the house opens up, as if it's inviting her in. So she goes to investigate and finds this really weird art piece that she is transfixed upon, as if it was put there for her. But the party rages on, and Tick comes inside. He was keeping watch on the porch in his army uniform, and one of the guys from the neighborhood who he knows a little bit but doesn't seem to really like mentions to him that he's noticed that Tick and Letty might have a thing. And this guy used to date Letty back in high school, and he's feeling a little nostalgic. But if Tick has laid his claim, then he's gonna back off. And he gestures over to Letty and says, but you might want to act quickly because Letty is dancing very seductively with another guy. So when Letty goes to the bathroom, Tick makes his move, barges in there, and the two have sex. And Tick has that sheepish grin on his face like, yeah, I did it. But Letty's feeling really awkward and confused. But as she's sitting downstairs with her sister, trying to get her thoughts together, they hear something outside, and when they go to the window, they notice a cross burning. And that is the final straw for Letty Lewis. Because Letty Lewis becomes Letitia fucking Lewis. She grabs a baseball bat and she starts going to town on the cars that are parked outside blaring horns, busting them all up and bashing that stupid brick off of the steering wheel. And she ends with the most epic bat flip at the white people in the neighborhood that are standing on their lawns looking aghast. But since it's 1955, the cops come, and who do they arrest? Letitia Lewis. And as she's sitting in the paddy wagon, she starts getting questioned as to why she bought the house. And the driver of the paddy wagon is driving pretty erratically, and it's causing Letty to fly all over the place, getting busted up pretty good. And when the car stops, the cop says, "You really don't know anything about that house you bought, do you?" He tells her that they found the body parts of 8 black people in the basement of the house, and they were buried in that room where the noises were coming from in the basement. But Letty gets bailed out, heads back to the house, and Letty's been taking pictures around the house, and she turns that room in the basement into a dark room. But she notices when she's hanging up the pictures that there are slash marks all over them. And when she puts all the pictures together, a face appears in the slash marks. But not only a face appears, a face literally rises out of the photo screaming at her to get out of the house. And Letty frantically comes up from the basement and starts looking at the other pictures that she took. But as she's doing so, Ruby is telling her that they have an issue. People are moving out. They don't feel safe. And it's an issue because they have a mortgage payment to make. And that's when Letty makes a mistake, saying, "It'll be fine. I still have some money that Mom left me." And right away, she knows she made a mistake, because Ruby had no idea that their mother left her any money whatsoever. But their mom didn't just leave Letty some money. She left Letty all of the money. And Letty didn't bother to tell Ruby or her brother any of this. And that's what pisses off Ruby the most. The fact that she took the inheritance and tried to play it off like she was buying this house for the both of them instead of splitting it equally. Especially after Letty didn't do a damn thing to help her mother. And it's not like Letty asked for the inheritance and expected it, and she was just as surprised as anybody when she got it. But Ruby's whole thing is you never should have kept it a secret. And she's not the only one who feels lied to, because Montrose has taken Tick's advice and headed over to George's place. But Hippolyta brings up this whole issue with George, saying something doesn't feel right. It just feels like there's something you guys aren't telling me. But Montrose still doesn't tell her the truth. Now that night, Tick heads to the bar and he finds Letty there doing a bunch of research, because she's realized her house is haunted. She tells him how the realtor was pretty cagey about the previous owners. He wouldn't give many details, but he did call it the Winthrop house. And while she didn't find anything about the Winthrops, she was able to find the previous owner, a guy named Hiram Epstein. And he was a scientist at the University of Chicago until he was fired for unethical experimental practices. And she thinks that he was experimenting on humans. She also finds it weird that the police captain was so invested into the house. And that's when she finds a newspaper clipping with the police captain who was questioning her and the scientist. She then shows Tick the pictures that she took the day they moved in. And next to all the tenants, you can clearly see there are people in them. I mean, it's blurry, but you can make out faces. So Letty matched up those faces to missing people, and sure enough, they're one and the same. So the way she has it figured out, the police captain was kidnapping black people to give to this guy, and then this guy was killing them with his experimental practices. And now these ghosts are trapped in her house with their killer, and they're tormented. So they need to figure out a way to purge the house. But before they can do that, they need to discuss what happened the previous night, because Letty reveals to him that when they had sex, that was her first time. She was a virgin. And Tick starts to apologize, but she says, no. I don't regret it. I needed it. I mean, after what happened in Artem, I needed to feel something. But with that admittance out the way, they need to figure out a way to purge the house, and they get a voodoo witch doctor kind of person to sacrifice a goat on the porch and then head into the basement where she says, yeah, no, there's definitely something here. So the three get in a circle and they start chanting. But while they're doing that, 3 of their neighbors break into the house. Let's call them Chet, Bryce, and Blake. And as all 3 of those bros start searching through the house for Letty and Tick, holding baseball bats ready to bash their brains in, the house starts fighting back, drawing them all in one by one and killing all of them. Now, the ceremony going down in the basement is getting pretty frantic. Things are literally flying around the 3 of them, and then it just stops. And it's calm for a bit, but then the sprinkler system goes on. And they try to get out of the basement, but the witched voodoo doctor person is thrown back. And she's basically possessed. She starts choking Letty, throwing her to the side, and then turning her attention to Tick. Choking him, but then suddenly collapsing. And as Letty looks at Tick, she realized that now he is possessed. And suddenly, all of the ghosts of the people that are there appear in a circle, screaming at Tick, because Tick has been possessed by the doctor. And they're all mangled up, just like the way the doctor left him. But one by one, they start to reappear the way that they were, healed. And Letty screams, "Get the fuck out of my house." And all of a sudden, all the ghosts are gone, and it's just Letty. And the purging has worked. So Letty opens back up the boarding house, gets some new tenants, and even gets some local publicity in a newspaper article. And as she's walking around the house with the reporter asks just, hey, off the record, do you know anything about the 3 white people in your neighborhood who suddenly disappeared? But Letty says, no, I don't know anything. And as Letty and the reporter are getting off the elevator that's in the house, the elevator continues to go down and down and down. And when it opens up, you see the 3 bodies of those white people, along with the skeletons of a lot more down in a tunnel. Now, Tick was hanging around outside of the realtor's office that sold Letty the house, and he sees a familiar face walk in. Christina. So when Tick walks in, he overhears Christina telling the realtor to get in the car and pack up because he's closing up shop. And after the realtor leaves, it's just Tick and Christina in the office, and Tick says, Letty's inheritance didn't come from her mother, it came from you. She asks, how did you figure it out? And he says, Winthrop. Tick saw that name carved on the frame of her father's favorite painting. She tells him that Horatio Winthrop was one of the founding members of the Sons of Adam, but he was banished after he stole pages from the Book of Names. He was just sick of Titus being the only one who could read the language, so he tried to develop his own from the stolen pages. And Hiram Epstein, that doctor who was experimenting on people, he was a follower of his. Tick cuts her off and says, I didn't come here for a history lesson, and then pulls out a gun and points it at her. But he can't pull the trigger because Christina has him under a kind of spell. And she says, I'll continue the lesson now. She tells him that most of the Order never create their own spells because, quite frankly, they don't have the discipline or the talent. Those that do usually only get one spell in their lifetime. And her father's claim to fame was his invulnerability. But he had to lift that spell in order to open the door to the Garden of Eden. And that's kind of how he died. She tells Tick, it's extraordinary, really, when you think about it. Every spell the Sons have created has come from just one deciphered chapter from the Book of Names. And it's all orally been passed down by Titus. Now, the book is gone, and Titus locked his pages in a booby-trapped vault that no one can get into. But imagine the possibilities if Horatio Winthrop's pages were to be found. The language of Adam could finally be decoded. She then gives him a note with her number on it and says, call me when you're ready to learn more about our family legacy. And then she leaves. Thank you so much for watching this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel. If you don't see the next video up in the corner, don't worry, I'll get it up in a couple days. Hit thumbs up if you liked the video, hit thumbs down if you didn't, and be nice in the comments section.